Hey, greetings everybody, it's GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we finished off the Undead campaign in Reign of Chaos, Warcraft 3. Fun little mission where you have to survive for 30 minutes. And that ended the campaign. We saw at the end, basically, Archimonde came and he destroyed Dalaran. We know that Jaina has fled to Kalimdor, and from the prologue campaign, we know that the orcs have already been there, and they united with the trolls, the Darkspear trolls, when they got there. So stay a while on this, and as we pivot over to Kalimdor and the Horde now, with the Long March. Medivh sensed the Burning Legion on Azeroth, and he knew the demons would soon begin their assault on Kalimdor. Fortunately, the remnants of the Alliance and the Horde had nearly arrived at the continent. Though Thrall and his people had left first, Jaina Proudmoore and her followers had closed the distance. The Alliance had enjoyed calm seas and full sails. They did not have to endure the angry storm that had battered the Horde's fleet and blown most of it off course. Though Medivh had succeeded in bringing the Horde and the Alliance to Kalimdor, he knew an even greater challenge awaited. The factions needed to join forces, but he could not simply ask them to do so. Too much enmity lingered between them. He would have to subtly draw them into a face-to-face meeting. Only then could he reveal himself and convince them to put aside their differences for the good of Azeroth. Medivh chose to lure Thrall and Jaina to a specific place in Kalimdor, Stone Talon Peak. The mountain, located south of the world tree Nordrassil, was considered sacred by local cultures. Magic suffused the peak, lending the site a certain air of significance and gravitas. The only question was whether Thrall and Jaina Proudmoore would survive the journey to the peak. They reached Kalimdor at different times and in different places, but they both faced hardships as they marched inland from the eastern coast. The terrain was harsh, a red wasteland that offered little in the way of food or water. The wildlife was just as inhospitable. Savage pig-like quillboar and poisonous scorpions prowled the jagged hills. As the days wore on, both Jaina and Thrall wondered whether they had made the right decision in coming to Kalimdor. Was there really any hope here, or had they merely traded one land of conflict for another? The march inland was difficult, but it was also rewarding in unexpected ways. Particularly for the Horde. Shortly after arriving, Thrall discovered wreckage from the missing ships in his fleet. It seemed that Grommash Hellscreen and the other orcs had survived the storm and reached Kalimdor first. They were nowhere to be found, and Thrall assumed they had forged ahead on their own. Galvanized by the discovery, Thrall led his followers deeper into Kalimdor, eager to track down the rest of the Horde. But instead of finding Grommash, the young warchief found himself in the middle of a war. Conflict raged between two of Kalimdor's native races, the Tauren and the Centaur, and actually it has been for a long time if you remember the old chronicles where we read about Desolace and how it was formed. Both were rugged and mighty. They were different in almost every other way. The tauren were enormous bovine creatures, but their imposing size belied a gentle spirit. They had deep ties to nature through their deity, whom they called the Earth Mother. The tauren also communed with the world's elements through their long tradition of shamanism. The Centaur viewed these mystical pursuits as weak. They were a brutal, warlike people who hunted the tauren for sport. With powerful equine lower bodies and humanoid torsos, the Centaur were well suited to warfare on Kalimdor's open plains. For generations, the Tauren had weathered intermittent attacks from the Centaur. The battles took a heavy toll on both sides. Though the Tauren were kind-hearted, they did not shy away from combat. They made the Centaur pay for every unprovoked attack. Yet they had no love for war. Whenever the Centaur appeared, the Tauren opted to find a new place to call home, rather than throw their lives away. They lived in a constant state of upheaval, and they never stayed in one place for long. A year of peace was always followed by another of war. The Tauren came to accept this great cycle of conflict as inescapable. It was the only life they knew, but that was about to change. Thrall became fast friends with the Tauren's wise leader, High Chieftain Cairn Bloodhulf. The war chief admired that many Tauren practiced shamanism and respected the land. The tauren had noble hearts and yearned for a better future, but they were constantly drawn into bloody conflict. Thrall would not ignore the injustice he was witnessing. His horde stood as a beacon of hope for races just like the tauren, the misunderstood, the oppressed, and the forgotten. And his horde would fight to protect those in need. That's why, in many ways, the horde is cool, is awesome. I like both now over the years, and I main an alliance now. But when I first got into Warcraft, and for many long years, I loved horde and repped horde for sure. In a land of dust and cracked earth called the Barrens, the horde stood shoulder to shoulder with the tauren in battle. Their combined might crashed down on the centaur warbands like a hammer and scattered them to the wind. The defeat shocked the centaur and sent them limping out of the Barrens in disgrace. They would never again see the tauren as easy prey. For the first time in memory, the tauren saw the promise of a new future. The centaur would always be a threat, but not as much as they had once been. The tauren's nomadic existence was over. At last, they had broken the cycle of conflict. In the wake of the battle, Cairn Bloodhoof offered Thrall supplies and even some of his mightiest warriors to help the horde reach Stone Talon Peak in the north. Most of the other tauren ventured west into a grassy plain known as Mulgore. There they would finally settle and build a permanent home. Okay, and that sets up why are we going to have the capital of Mulgore at Mulgore at Thunder Bluff? Why do the tauren join the horde? Why does Warcraft 3 have tauren as allies? And probably my guess is when we do our first level of the Orc campaign, which is coming up on our next episode, we're probably going to fight Centaur. That's my guess now. All right, cool. We got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. That gives us a little backstory before we play our next one. But I thank everyone for watching and for listening, and I will see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.